I had seen adverts and people talking about Avowed in the run up to its release. I have Game Pass and I spend a lot of time in Battle.net playing WoW, so I would see the countdown all the time and I had already made a choice to give it a go. It literally came at no extra cost, so why wouldn't I? But I wasn't necessarily counting down the days until it was available. I thought I would get to it when I get to it. Then some of the early review codes started going out and I started to hear conflicting opinions from great to fine to worst game ever because it was woke. I mean, good fucking lord, is anything not woke these days? But there was one particular reviewer that I subscribed to on YouTube that, while specifically praising elements of the game, declared it woke because there were too many women in it, and therefore that is pushing an agenda and therefore woke. Now I still follow this guy because he sometimes looks at games that I like, and I won't name names because it's not important. His politics are probably dog shit to my mind, but to some level I can rise above such differences of opinion. But the statement that it was woke because there were too many women made me more curious to play it than before, out of petty spite if anything. Now, I will come back to the whole Avowed woke argument later in the video because the other reason for this video is for me to put forward my case as to why I actually ended up loving this game. We'll slot that segment in the middle like some kind of metaphorical shit sandwich. So it was that when it became available I hit download and my journey into the colourful fantasy world of Aora began. Firstly, let's talk about the universe this comes from. Fans of the Pillars of Eternity series will be no stranger to this world as that is where it is set, and I personally think it benefits from existing in a fully fleshed out environment with lots of lore that is already in place for the developers to draw upon. But I am not someone that has played those previous CRPG games. I was enticed to download one off Game Pass once and didn't get very far into it. I mean less than 30 minutes. As it became apparent that this was a proper isometric top-down CRPG in every conceivable sense of the word, and while the presentation and cover art did grab me, I have to be in the right state of mind for that type of game. But I often find that it helps me if I feel present in the world, and a first person perspective does that. Sure, I played Baldur's Gate 3 like any self-respecting nerd did, and it was great, but I still haven't finished it no matter how good it was. Part of that is down to me building headcanon that my half-elf fighter just wanted to bang Lae'zel, and as such I kind of played myself into a bit of a dead end whereby I stacked my party so full of angry warriors that in a particular battle I couldn't get close enough to the bad guy before he magicked my butthole into a dimension of pain. But I am getting off topic. I like those games, but sometimes the slower pace gives me opportunities to drop out mentally. That is obviously a me thing, but Avowed doesn't do that. You are active for the majority of the game, even if there is a lot of dialogue at times. And yes, some of the writing for that dialogue isn't going to be winning any awards, but it isn't aiming to. It is, however, fully voice acted, much like Baldur's Gate 3, and so there is no relying on text boxes and reading, which is always a problem for me. Yes, I know, it is very basic moron of me to say,
me don't like the reading bits,
but I get distracted easily. But here I get the story I need, and the dialogues provide a nice little respite from caving in lizard men's heads. The main story has a simple premise, but with enough intrigue to never get in the way of a good time and keep me moving forward. A nice touch they have is that you can reference highlighted words and get background lore on them. A lot of them are just, this is a fantasy word we are substituting for fuck or shit. Kind of like how everyone used to say Frel on Farscape. Popped in a little Farscape reference there.
Nice.
But occasionally it will be referring to another empire or historic event, and whilst I already pointed out that the writing won't win prizes or maybe stand up to previous standards set by Obsidian, it does mean that they could continually write in the present moment without having to awkwardly shoehorn exposition all the time. And while it doesn't have all of the flippant humour of some of their previous offerings, it does, as you progress through the story, have a fair amount of humour whilst remaining a fairly standard fantasy affair. There is stuff to explore, but it isn't a sweeping open world for you to get lost in. It is a much smaller curated experience where you are funneled down certain paths and more given the sense of freedom than actual freedom itself. And as long as you stick to the path laid out by the main or side quests, you'll have a good time. If you try to step outside of it, you will notice the limitations and invisible walls and barriers. I did see some moaning about not being able to kill NPCs and knock things off tables, breaking immersion, but maybe we should question why we feel the need to go around trying to wreck the place and or try to kill everyone in sight, even though that is exactly what I did. And more to the point, continued to try and do, even after finding out that I couldn't. Maybe I should speak to someone. Anyway, while we're on the subject, I had a look at some Metacritic reviews and I saw on quite a few occasions people referencing this type of stuff and that you would be better off playing Skyrim instead. I'm sorry, did we forget the whole buckets on head thing and Bethesda's general mad buggy bullshit? Before I move on from Metacritic, I saw a lot of reviews for 0 and 1, moaning about graphics and writing etc. And I am sorry, but there is no way this game, a game that is fully formed, runs great, on my PC at least, and is presented well, is a 0 or a 1. You might not like it, but that is subjective. Objectively, the game is at least a 5, just for being a perfectly adequate, functional, playable game. Although I would argue it is a lot more than that. Methinks there might be something else behind those scores. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. We can sniff deep of that giant fetid pile of shit when we get there. Anyway, I think the main strength of this game is the combat. Fast and at times a bit sweaty, but energetic and enjoyable. I have heard it referred to as casual, and not to get ahead of my actual point, but yeah, maybe it is a little casual, but there is still enough complexity to keep it feeling enjoyable. You not only have your own character's abilities on your skill bar, but your party members as well. So for instance, Kai, your beautiful blue boy, can be instructed to perform a shotgun blast that interrupts an enemy. Or maybe you have someone who can push out an area of effect heal. So through choosing which two members you include in your party of 3 each time you leave the camp, you can build different setups. You also choose and upgrade your companion's skills, so really they are your skills but presented to you in a slightly different way. My first game file was a magic user wielding a grimoire and a wand. But I found it hard to keep the enemy at range and it felt a bit squishy. I played this up to what I consider the first proper boss fight with a big bear, and while I did eventually beat it, I thought I'd go back and try a different build while I wasn't too far in. So I started a new file, went pure meathead dumbass warrior and pumped nearly all of my ability points into strength and found I went through a lot faster. And when I got hold of a hammer, the sound effects and the feel of the crushing blunt force trauma really felt good and drove me on. I saved up a bit of money and sold a load of stuff and then bought myself a fine hammer, and this became a little bit OP and carried me through a good chunk of the game, keeping me ahead of the enemy curve. There are groups of enemies in the game that will just be too strong for you to defeat with your current loadout, and they will have 3 skulls next to their names. But once I got my fine hammer, I was able to defeat these perhaps ahead of where I should have, and from there I managed to get and equip better gear and continue surging forward. And talking of surging, I essentially rode one skill to ultimate victory, and that was the dash strike, the first skill that you learn. I would fly forward, closing the distance between me and the enemy, stun them, and then stove their fucking head in with the hammer before they could get their wits. I especially enjoyed dash striking smaller enemies and seeing them ragdoll off the side of cliffs and ledges. And whilst combat is fun, it isn't totally without its challenges. Sometimes that comes in the form of fighting packs of enemies, and as you slog away hammering them, you realise that they don't seem to be dying. And then you realise there is a fucking shaman healing everyone as you fight. So sometimes you have to assess the pack, dodge past the attacks of the main bruiser, close the distance and take out the healer, and then murder the ranged attackers, and finally turn your attention back to the main melee threat. There were some enemies later in the game that were pretty hard to take down, and overall there was a fair enough challenge to feel like you overcame something, but nothing where you felt like you were banging your head against a brick wall. But above all, combat is fun. It is good fun to smack the ever-loving shit out of things. Good, clean, wholesome fun.
Not even the younglings survived.
Just moving through the world is fun. Yes, admittedly, as long as you are moving within the confines of where the developers want you to go, but all the same, it feels responsive to run, jump and dodge. I have heard some people criticise that you can only jump up and forward and not to the side because dash is tied to pressing the left, right and backwards direction and the jump button simultaneously. But I'll be honest, I had no real issues and it felt pretty natural to me. You often have to scale vertically to get to the next part of the game or to find hidden items or chests. And while this isn't Guild Wars 2 levels of jumping puzzles, it is quite enjoyable. Now, I am not going to do any spoilers in this video, but I will say that by the end of the game, the story makes sense, every step you take fits within it, and it felt suitably enjoyable and provided the feeling of adventure without hanging around too long. A lot of dialogue options tend to lead to the same ultimate place, but there are genuinely choices that you make throughout that do significantly affect the story and will provide a reason for going back and replaying to see different branching paths. I actually agonised over a certain choice for quite some time, whether I should take the option that I thought would drive me towards a certain result, or should I stay with the choice that best represented the headcanon I built for my character's motivation as I saw it. It might take a little while to reveal that, but it is there, so just stick with it. Now, let's eat our stinky vegetables and talk about the woke stuff. Oh, wokey woke. So very woke. Well, not really. I mean, what does that word even fucking mean anymore? Like I said at the beginning, a reviewer I watched moaned that it was woke or pushing a political agenda because as he saw it, it had too many women in it. I mean, I don't know how fragile some of these people's minds are or how obsessed they are with the concept of woke that it just distorts everything, but why did I not think about this while playing it? Not even once. There were male characters and there was female characters, and apart from that there wasn't even non-binary characters, apart from that you could choose to present as they them. Have we sunk so far that now just women in general are woke? Like, I could kind of understand back in the day people moaning when it was something a little more complex like non-binary stuff, which if you have never encountered before or spent any time trying to get your head around it, yes, it could be a bit confusing and challenging. But now just too many women? What the fuck is happening to us? Surely people are using this word so much by now that it is utterly meaningless by this point. If everything is woke, then nothing is woke. But having played the game all the way through, I will list the things I think could even be considered woke, as it were. So, number 1, pronouns option at character creation. Not an issue in the slightest. Set your pronouns to what you want. You are not forced to do anything you don't want to do, so it has no impact. There's no fucking neo-pronouns or anything complex like that, unless you're just so delicate that the mere existence sends you into a weird rage. Pronouns! Number 2, it has women as main characters. Whoopsie daisy, your misogyny is showing. This to me is really just a product of the current over-obsession on the side of those who are outraged, rather than the game itself actually being woke. Sorry mum, your very existence is woke now. To round out the gender-related stuff, number 3, everyone continually refers to a god by they-them pronouns. It isn't made explicit that this is what they are doing, they just never use male or female pronouns. But it is after all a god, so I really don't see any problem with this. They're probably risen above such petty things. They certainly don't reference it to make some sort of political point, so if this offends you, you'd have to be reaching. And lastly, number 4, the overarching theme of colonialism, of which you are the envoy for a colonial empire who is asserting their dominance in this foreign land. The writing is a bit hokey at times, of course, but colonialism is a theme and a motivator for bad guys used over and over in fantasy and sci-fi. Just look at the Empire in Star Wars. So I suppose to someone who might be inclined to align themselves to a certain side of the political spectrum, pointing out that colonialism is bad may well fall into the woke category. But are we saying that colonialism isn't bad? I feel like anyone who isn't just a fascist cunt would probably say that colonialism isn't good. So I'm not sure there is much room for manoeuvre there if you want to point to that as woke. Maybe if you're English you might be a bit butthurt by all the colonialists having English accents, but I mean, perhaps we shouldn't have done a load of colonialism in our past, you know? Kind of asked for that one, didn't we? We are quite sensitive little souls really, us English. We don't like that kind of thing, being reminded of stuff we have done in the past. But you know, we're alright with Germans or Russians being the bad guys and everything. Weird that we don't recognise our own role in history. Perhaps the argument might be that it is bringing politics into games. An argument that I find to be very weak because, as pointed out, what about Star Wars and 100 other IPs that have that as a motivating theme? The truth is that politics is in everything. It motivates our actions in life and in art. It is everywhere, and when you say get politics out of games or media in general, what you are really saying is get the politics I don't like out of games. But apart from those themes, the game is pretty fucking standard, like to an excessive degree. It is extremely middle of the road. It could be called Fantasy Tropes, the video game, because it plays it so straight down the fantasy line. And that delivers us to the true reason why I love this game. It is easygoing. It is just a good time. It is an action adventure film you put on to enjoy that you've seen 100 times. You are not asking to be challenged. You don't need the best dialogue. It doesn't need to be complex. Sometimes you just want a frictionless experience, and that is what they have done with this game. They have removed the friction to allow you to have fun. There's no stamina when you run all you fucking want. Just gump your way across the fucking world. Become over encumbered? No worries, just automatically go into your inventory and send things back to your camp to stash it away and carry on the way. You just never feel penalised by anything. Many of its systems are there to be engaged, but you don't have to slave away at them. You can drop the odd upgrade on your weapon at camp, and then maybe you just pick up better weapons as you go. You don't have to gather or grind, just progress through the game and it will kind of just take care of itself. It's easy, it's comfortable, it's middle of the road, it's just a good time. I think many people that have bounced off this game are kind of playing it wrong, and by that I mean that it may have been sort of misidentified and kind of misrepresented itself just by what people saw in the trailers and how it kind of looks. I've read many people comparing it to Skyrim, and it just isn't Skyrim. This is no open world, as I said before. It may give the illusion of a bit of freedom to explore, but it is a linear experience and should be played like a game of old, thinking of each area as a sort of level to be completed to then move on to the next. I think you should just play the main story, not stop to hang around in cities and scrutinise everything. Just keep moving forward with the main story and enjoy the ride, and when it is done, turn it off and play something else. Perhaps every once in a while, stop to admire the scenery, because one thing I will say is the people who moaned about the graphics in this game must, like my dear old nan used to say, have shit in their eyes. This game is gorgeous and colourful, and they even managed to make deserts look interesting. This game reminds me of a time in gaming where you could get a modest video game experience, where not every game had to be a blockbuster. The kind of game you would rent from the video shop and play for a week and return, and you'd have your fun and move on. In my last video, I spoke about realistic expectations, and I think that perhaps we don't have realistic expectations of our games anymore. We want better all the time, and in doing so, we are just aping the attitudes of the video game executive class who expect continual growth in a finite system. So let's reset our expectations and learn to appreciate the middle of the road, the 7 out of 10s, the games that are just fine. Avowed is just a casual good time, and that's why I love it. Thanks for watching, and I'm going to be making a bit of a change in direction for the channel, or perhaps not a total change, but an expanding of topics that I will cover. Since I started making videos, I have been learning more about the production side, and this was always intended to be a creative outlet for me, and I just have too many ideas and opinions in me to just stick to one niche. So stick around for more videos on video games, movies, politics, culture, and whatever else I feel a compulsion to gob off about. Anyway, cheers.